Welcome to our latest webinar from Access Innovations, making scholarly content AI ready and more valuable. Excuse me. I'm Heather Kotula, President and CEO of Access Innovations. Joining me today are Marjorie Lava, Chief Scientist and Founder of Access Innovations, and Veronica Showers, VP of Business Development. That's our team in today's webinar, and here's our contact information. Just a couple housekeeping items. Yes, we are recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website. We'll send out a link to all attendees when that's posted. And please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for questions. We'll get to those at the end. And what you're going to learn today is pretty exciting. We're going to give you some plain language understanding of tokens, vector databases, RAG, agents, agentic workflows, and MCP. There's a lot of confusion in the terminology around these things, and we're going to try to decipher those for you. We're also going to teach you how to structure metadata layers that contain semantic enrichment and attribution to help language models produce accurate and trustworthy outputs. And lastly, what a publisher-controlled ideal infrastructure would look like. And we'll give you a blueprint to help you make that journey and monetize your content. All right. And Veronica, I think we're over to you.
Well, actually, I think it's over to me.
Oh, I apologize. It is over to Margie. That's correct.
So what I want to talk about as kind of a level setting is that the publishing landscape is changing and changing very quickly. Next one. For the past 500 or so years since Gutenberg, everybody's been able to share the printed page, but things are changing. There's a lot of new opportunities available, and the time for wait and see, at least from our point of view, has changed. Agents and what's known as the MCPs, the Model Context Protocols, are letting publishers show their content in a new controlled and attributable knowledge service so that people can make discoveries in their search, but publishers can also build new revenue streams, new products, and as long as they keep track of their own IP, which is a feeling you'll hear again and again from us, is that the publisher should own that enrichment. They should own the IP and it should travel with their data. The early frontier companies in AI field have now been accompanied by a whole lot of other companies, and they're shifting toward licensing, changing from having publishers either feeling like spectators or having their content stolen by AI people to becoming really essential suppliers of their authoritative inputs. So it's important to realize that the AI companies want and need your authoritative content, but they also, there are companies now that make it possible for you to offer it directly through some kind of a language model. So understanding that authority and making sure that there's some rigor applied to the data are becoming sincere differentiators in how we look at our content. And things are becoming much more mainstream. And as long as people are on board with curated authoritative content, which resides with the publisher, publishers find themselves in a very good position. So our goal is to support those publishers, and the purpose of today's webinar is to demystify AI and put it into operational terms so that it's an AI-ready information architecture. And that will enable new services and revenue, not just from AI, but I think you'll find from lots of other options as well, and yet helping you maintain control. I think more than anything, it's maintaining control and enhancing or adding to that data that will move people from being fearful and reactive to becoming strategic. So, historically, publishers think of content as what you see on the right hand of your screen, that traditional PDF, the article of record. It's machine readable. We know what the hierarchy is. There's a title, there's an abstract, there's authors, there's sometimes embedded metadata when visible to the readers behind the scenes, but most of it's displayed, and this structure is intended for people, but not for machines. Platforms think of content in a different kind of way because they need to machine render that data. The metadata is embedded into often full text XML or into EPUB or some other format, but JATS and EPUB are the most popular ones. There's others like Onyx and so on, and all of those are certainly easy to deal with. And those support the preservation of the data in a platform-ready format and rendering on distribution platforms and providing behind-the-scenes styles and transformation of the data so that the consumers can read them. Search systems think of content in yet another way, and because their primary focus is on the discovery and retrieval of content, they've created discrete fields for indexing and retrieval, and we know those as keywords or taxonomy terms and authors and dates and other ways to provide additional filtering of the data. But the emphasis is on retrieval and more recently relevance instead of precision and recall, which bothers me, but it's the popular thing, but not on semantic depth and not necessarily even on attribution. So we move to a world now where AI is taking over and they think of things differently. And I'm going to let Veronica describe to you how that works. Over to you, Veronica.
Thanks, Margie. Hmm. Yeah, we definitely need to understand how language models work in order to really harness the power of what they represent. And what we're really focused on is not necessarily what the frontier models did, which is, really launch this new ability for us to engage with our audiences in this way. But we're really talking about how you can take and create a new way, a new revenue source, a new way to deliver content to your audience and to your communities. And there's a lot of buzzwords that are floating around related to agentive AI, MCP, RAG, chunks, tokens, and there's a lot of noise that relates to all of these things. And you might not know how they fit together. So we wanted to provide you a framework from which to think about all of these terms. And I'm sure some of you already know what most of these are, but I want to put them in a context that I think really kind of represents how you can potentially harness this power. And that is the brain and the body. So on the brain side, which is over here, you have tokens, which is a representation of your content. You have chunks, how that content is actually organized, and then it's stored within a vector database. This is the brain. This is how you are able to then create a product that can be sold. On the body side, this is how you can monetize that product with RAG, with agents, and with MCP. And I'm going to be going into what all of these things are in this webinar, starting with the brain. Let's look at how language models actually think in order for you to then, understand what needs to be done in order to monetize this new opportunity. So a word for a language model is a token ID. So there you have a sentence, and that token, that for the language model, that sentence is represented with these specific tokens. And if I break that down, you can see that for the most part, each word has a token, but as you can see here for immunotherapy, it's actually 3 tokens. Most scientific words are usually more than 1 token, but that is how your words are actually represented, not by the actual word here, but by the numeric representation of that word through the token IDs. Now, in order for a language model to really understand the tokens that you've presented it likes to have them grouped. And the average is around 500 tokens within what's called a chunk of tokens. So you might be wondering why you'd want to chunk this out, because, well, the reason why is because language models like to think they're optimized in smaller groupings of information, especially when then you go into the next step, which I'll be talking about in just a bit. But if you put too many tokens into one chunk, let's say you want to put a whole article, that's about 15,000 tokens on average. That's way too many for one chunk. There's going to be what ends up happening there is that there's going to be a lot of noise for the language model to understand, and it's going to give you it's going to increase in hallucinations. But you also don't want them too small because then you're going to lose meaning in terms of your overall document. So you have to find the right balance. Once you've done that, once you've chunked your content, then that's the vectorization process of putting those into a vector database. And what that's called, it's called embeddings, embedding that content in those chunks into the vector database. The vector database, you can see it has like quadrants of where that specific chunk is housed. And it's kind of, you can see that here where you have chunk 1, chunk 2, chunk 3, and those chunks kind of reside like this. Here's an article, here's another article based on color. To give you kind of a surface level representation of what the inside of a vector database looks like. But it's all based on these quadrants of where these individual chunks are located. And it also allows the language model to then retrieve information kind of in a surface level way. And we'll be talking about how we can improve that later on. That's the brain. You have the tokens, which is the words, organized within chunks, and then housed within a vector database in specific quadrants within that vector database. So let's talk about the body. Once you have your brain, once you have your product, what can you do with that product? Well, one of the first things you'd want to think about is RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And what RAG does, it serves a very important purpose for you. Number one, it gives you a way to protect your content. So when a user puts a query in, RAG will then query your database, locate relevant chunks of information. Maybe it gets 7 different chunks from 3 different articles, and it sends those chunks plus the query over to the language model to generate, and that's where the generation comes from, generate a specific response that is then presented to you. What this does is it protects your content because it's not allowing the language model to know everything within your database, just those chunks. And when those chunks are used and the retrieval process is done and the generation process is done, that information is basically not used by the language model. It's not learning from that information, but you're still getting access to the pattern recognition capabilities that it has to be able to generate a response. And this is a product that you can sell to and license to libraries, to other language model companies and whatnot. This is a tool that then can be used for a bunch of other reasons too. And one of those other purposes is to potentially connect to an agent. So let's talk about what an agent is. There are different types of agents, but in general sense, an agent is a taskmaster. They complete a single task. And a task can be something very simple like go retrieve information for me. Or in this case, the one that I've wanted to showcase is an ORCID verification agent. In this situation, one agent would extract information from either your peer review system or from a manuscript, extract the author names and ORCIDs. Then it would check to see if there's any problems with them, would access the ORCID API to fix any potential issues, and then report back what it did. So that would be an agent completing that repetitive task for you on an ongoing basis. Now, there's also something called agentic workflows, also sometimes referred to as tools. These are multiple agents working in concert to accomplish a bigger function or task. In this case, in order to kind of go with the ORCID validation, I wanted to create a quality assurance agent. This quality assurance agent's job is to kind of do a technical check of all of the information that's being collected, all the technical information that's being collected from authors, such as do they have ORCIDs, funding metadata, run style checks to ensure that everything is in the right style, and some other tasks that you might want to use in the technical check. That's then fed to the master agent or the QA engine that puts everything together and reports back what's done. This is a great product. This is the kind of product, agentic workflows you can actually create products with. So for example, if you want to create a product, a research assistant type of product that can be embedded within your hosting platform, you would want to use agentic workflows for that. It would require, at least in my opinion, about 3 agents, one agent to, generate the response, another agent to validate that response, and yet a third agent to double check if it's really in the right voice, and then to send that to the user. So that would be an agentic workflow. You can package that together and also sell that as potentially a subscription to that specific learning assistant. There's other opportunities as well, other than just that, in terms of agentic workflows. It could also be used to improve internal workflow processes like this quality assurance agent. MCPs, or model context protocols, protocol is, I really think of it as kind of a universal adapter. So if you are a PC user, you think of adapter. If you're an Apple user, you think of a dongle. And what this does is allows you to connect all of these things together. Before MCPs were developed by Anthropic in 2024, every time you needed to make a connection with an agent or with RAG, it would be custom development, which of course is not a great scalable solution. So what MCP allows you to do is have kind of a connection in between agents and outside services, outside databases, all into one system. And then with that, you're able to then determine the access rights for access to those products. So for example, you can determine, for this specific client, they can get into the system, they can access RAG, and they can use, they can use RAG and then get information out. And then you can set that up and determine what someone or something can do within the MCP and within your system and outside of the system. Who can come in, who can come out, what information can come in, what information can go out. You would be setting those requirements and those specifications. And you can connect a bunch of different things. So for example, let's say you want to set up a relationship or a contract with Perplexity, and they want to access your RAG system. You would do that through the MCP and have them access it that way. And there's some great vendors out there that are doing this work. I highly recommend that you speak with them. I'm not going to name any names because it's not going to be fair, but there are definitely some good ones out there. And ultimately, what this does is allows you to create an ideal publisher workflow or infrastructure, and I will be talking about this in greater detail towards the end. So you might be wondering, well, what's Access Innovation's role in this infrastructure, and what do we do to support publishers? Well, we really work on the brain side of the equation. Our work is really to ensure that the brain itself, the foundation, is optimized for language models, so that by the time you get to the monetization side, the body side, you're going to have accuracy, you're going to have an audit trail, you're going to have quite a bit there that will help your program be more successful. So the things that we do, there are two big chunks of things that we do. First, or buckets. First, we chunk intelligently. There's different strategies for chunking, and it depends on your content. So it's really publisher specific. We may want to chunk at a paragraph level. We may want to chunk at a section level. And it just depends on the content that you have. Should we have overlapping chunks? Those kinds of things we would be helping in terms of developing a strategy for your specific corpus and how to chunk your content. We also add a metadata layer to each chunk that provides information for your system to function in an optimal way. And I'll be going through those in right now, actually, the very next slide here. So as you can see, here's the article that Margie shared that we know, and we have chunked it here, just the first couple of paragraphs that I have represented. In this case, a paragraph was appropriate. So we want to keep this done, in a way that a human understands it. So we want to make sure those chunks are not severed. There's definitely some bad practices with regards to chunking that I mentioned, like putting a whole article in or into one chunk, which makes a bunch of noise, or setting an arbitrary number of like 500 tokens per chunk. That's really bad too, because then you're going to end up potentially severing a paragraph, a sentence, or even a word in half. So you want to have a process, a mechanism, and we've built an engine to do this properly. Then we also have keyword tags for this specific chunk. Now, the tags, or the semantic enrichment, does two very important things for you. Number one, it improves retrieval. So when when RAG goes in to look for the proper chunks to then send to the language model, it's going to know, okay, this specific chunk here is about these three things. And the number of tags is also something that we have some best practices on, that we recommend in terms of how many tags per chunk, depending on the chunk size. But then the language model will know, okay, I don't have to read every single word. I don't have to understand every single word. This can tell me specifically where to get that information. It also does one other very important function. It basically confines the language model to understand that this specific chunk should only be used primarily for these reasons. It's not going to go in and guess through the context here on how it should use this chunk. You're instructing it as to how it should be used through the semantic enrichment. Next, we can add attribution. What attribution does, it does a couple of things for you. Number one, it creates, and the most important is that it creates an audit trail. So within that metadata layer, you can have your dates, you can have the title, the publisher, the DOI, and you can add a chunk ID to the DOI as well. So that audit trail, if you're wanting to find out in a license agreement, for example, how your articles are actually being used, by having these IDs, you're going to be able to report back and say, for this account, these are the articles that were used. Specifically, these are the chunks that were used in providing information to your audience, whether that's employees or students. So that ability to audit everything is really important, especially if there's even a problem. If there is a hallucination that happens, you're going to be able to identify the source of that hallucination, and what chunks were used, so that you can make adjustments along the way. Perhaps you needed to modify your prompt engineering workflow. Perhaps you need to add additional guardrails in that prompt engineering work. That will help you identify where and how to solve some of those problems. And in terms of delivery, so we have a bunch of different ways of delivering that content. The slides that you saw before is just to kind of give you a visual of how we can understand it as humans. But once you go into actually delivering the chunks to you, we would do that most likely in JSON, but we can do that in whatever format you want. But if we do so in JSON, you can immediately put that into a vector database, or you can use one of ours. So you can see here we have the chunk number or chunk ID, you have the article title and whatnot represented in JSON, and then you have the DOI. You can also add the chunk ID here as well, to create some more audit capabilities. But ultimately, that's what it would look like. We would send all of that to you. Now, as a summary of what we do, and to building that brain, we do the intelligent chunking, which then really preserves the context of that article because it is broken down. And we ensure that there is a meaningful understanding or meaning that the language model can derive from that information, through that chunking strategy. And then through the semantic enrichment, it gives that language model the instruction in terms of what that specific chunk is about, how it should be used, and improves that retrieval process. And then the attribution allows you to have that audit trail, that ability to then determine how those chunks are actually used by your customers. Why is that building that brain so important? Well, I kind of came up with this thing called path. Remember the path. First and foremost, anytime you're doing work on your own with your own content, that is, regardless if that content is open access, you still have to do this work. So you'll have vendors do this work for you. But then there's a little bit of confusion as to who owns that IP. So in a publisher owned, you would then have a publisher owned meaning layer for your content. Just like you do with XML, you own the XML. In this case, you would own the chunking workflow and the chunked data. You would have the ontologies associated with it. You would have all those relationships. It's your rules, your IP. It's a defensible asset. You also have that audit trail and that trust that's built into those chunks so that you can then build those business models that you need in order to and be able to then report on those going forward. You also have a technology architecture that's future proof. So if you want to, when you do this, you can then work with a vendor A for a agent that does research, a research assistant agent. And you can also work with this other company that's going to set up RAG, and then another company potentially that's going to be doing MCP. Most likely it's going to be maybe one vendor or two vendors. But if you want to switch, you don't, every single vendor, if you don't do this, will have to do it independently. So this way allows you to do it one time, do it under your terms, under your rules, and then flow, maintain control, and then select which vendor you want to work with down the road. And then the last one I think is very important, and that's high quality AI outputs. By doing this work, you're going to have higher accuracy, increased and more accurate retrieval. It's just going to work better, and the outputs are going to be much better. And we really want to be your foundation partner. We are I'm sure many of you on this call know who we are. We've been around for a long time. Margie she has been a part of the development of I don't know how many standards that we all take for granted now, like DOIs. She was involved in the development of all of that stuff. We're really battle tested. We have battle tested expertise. We have battle tested technology. And we're not an AI startup company. We've been around, and I think we've proven over literally decades that we're a trusted partner that you can depend on. So now let's look at the publisher-controlled AI foundation, or your architecture that will allow you to monetize that content. So first you have your publisher content. This is the authoritative information that language models want access to because it is authoritative. Or maybe academic libraries want it because that's how their students want to consume the information. But you have that authoritative content. The next thing you need to do is you need to chunk that content properly in meaningful chunks with tagging, with attribution, and ensure that that content is basically trained properly. And store that within a solid vector database, whether that's your own vector database, or if, let's say, you want to work with us, you want to add that to a vector database that ends up being your product. Once you have that, then you get into the monetization. Then you can use RAG. Then you can create agents and create different products. And I was talking to a vendor the other day, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, I could potentially create personalized um, classroom lessons for specific professors. I can do all kinds of things by doing it and working with agents to make this happen. It really kind of opens the door to a bunch of possibilities in terms of using this infrastructure. And then MCP allows you to then have a controlled way of licensing your authoritative content and then also being able to report back in terms of how that content is used through the access controls that are built into MCP. And that gives you the full infrastructure that we think is ideal for really monetizing your authoritative content that is now in such great demand by everyone, really. It always has been in demand, but now more so by language model companies or domain-specific language models or RAG-based companies. And over to Margie.
Oops. So, a couple of things. We do all of this programmatically. So that's somebody put a question in the chat saying it wasn't sustainable to do it one by one. No, we do it automatically using the data harmony software. So it's programmatic and it's pretty fast. But I wanted to talk about individual futures for organizations and the fact that by chunking the data, um, it's not just for AI. It powers search and navigation and management subscriptions and personalization of members and all manner of things that you can do with this level of data. We have Veronica mentioned a publisher that could do individualized lessons. Well, we do have a customer who is doing or supporting individual lessons for engineering information. And it's meaning that people are already using this kind of level of tagging to create new products and customize them to special needs. We want people, and we've emphasized this a lot, to make sure that you protect your IP, that you own it, and that it's transferable, that it travels with your data. All of the IP that you've added to the individual subsections of your data called chunks. I think it's clear how it reduces hallucinations and other misinterpretations of the data once it's in a language model, and therefore optimizes what you're able to deal with it. And of course, you are in control because you set the rules, you set the attribution levels, you set the level of tagging that's added to your data, and therefore it's clearly yours and it works best for your own individual content. Reusing existing content so that you can unlock a lot of existing value and combine and recombine for new products and new directions for the organization, so that it's not just an offering for data at the nurse's station. It's something that you compile for a new publication or a new online service. And we're finding a lot of people interested in doing building of new products and new assistants so that you can discover all kinds of information and build agents for specific purposes for individual needs. And so your data has legs that it didn't have before, and it's able to move quickly because you already have the data in a reusable format. Next slide. So, how do you get started? That's a question that people often have. And if you would like to, you could send us 25 to 50 sample articles or a book or any other kind of standards, any other kind of content. We will select an ontology for use with your data or select it with you. If you already have one, we'll use that. And if you don't, we have about 70 of them that we call knowledge domains, which are pre-existing. They already have a rule base accompanying them. So they're already there for automatically indexing the data. And it might be, or tagging the chunks. It might be we're only using a subsection of a much larger vocabulary, or we have one that we think will work really well for your data. And what we would return to you is that human readable data set for evaluation, the JSON, which you could import into a vector database. Some people have asked for it in a spreadsheet, and we're happy to provide it that way as well. But the most popular response has been a JSON, which, as you know, is a variation or a subset of XML. So I think that's it. Um, Heather, back to you for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margie and Veronica. Um, uh, there was a question, beyond articles and book manuscripts, can chunks be created from other, such as instructor, ancillary materials, video manuscripts, courses, etc.?
All of the above, absolutely. Of course, for this, we're talking about primarily articles and books, but yes, any kind of content that is that has text, we can chunk and appropriately using different strategies. But yes, it is programmatic. So this is not something, and it's not one at a time by hand. This is definitely a program. We've built an engine to do this at scale.
And if it's video data, we use a transcript of the audio layer, and those can be tagged to the timestamp is the most popular, or to the frame even, but most people are looking at it using the timestamps.
And on the slide, what is MCP's role? What does VB stand for?
VB. Let me go back to that. And
Vector database, probably.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a typo maybe.
Vector database. I just shortened it up to fit onto that slide.
Okay. Are you limited in the number of agents that you can have?
No.
No, not at all. You would be determining what agents you want, and basically creating products the way that you deem fit.
The only limit is your imagination.
Yeah.
Yep. We have a couple of thank you messages. And while other people are chiming in with their questions, Margie, maybe you could tell us what's up next for Access Innovations and Data Harmony.
I I will do that. I'm happy to do that. But there was one comment that I wanted to make, and that is we are often recommending that if people have them, they use a DOI. But you think, well, the DOI is at the article level. So what you do is you extend the DOI. Everything to the right of the period is in your control for the DOI, if you remember that from the syntax. And so you just extend the number so that you have a chunk number. And it's important to have some kind of an ID for every chunk. So you can invent one for the particular data set, or you can use the extend your existing IDs by just adding chunk numbers to the end. So what's next up for Access Innovations is the release of DH Web. That's a fully web-enabled, browser-enabled version of the Maestro software, which is the automatic indexing software combined with the vocabulary management system. So MAI plus the Source Master is being released as a fully web version. The client server version, which we've had for, well, since 1997 and is constantly improved, the 18th edition of that is coming out shortly for the few people that still want to use that instead of a web hosted version. And of course, the advent of our forthcoming other tools to support what we've just outlined here, like the vector database, will be part of the XIS, the XML intranet system. That release date is not yet scheduled, but those are coming out. And we have a number of press releases that'll be forthcoming as we release the other products. But just to give you a glimpse, we do have a automated cataloging system working from Onyx Records, ONIX Records, to help out libraries. And I think that's going to be a very exciting release. And we have a number of new partnerships that we'll be announcing as well. So I think that's as far as I can go with forthcoming stuff. But the DH Web is ready now. For those of you that are clients of the DH Web, you'll be getting a note from Dustin, maybe this week, more likely next week, with the documentation and more information about it, including the release notes. Back
Thank
to you.
Thank you, Margie. We don't have any other open questions. We have provided you with a lot of information here. So I encourage you to get in touch with us later as you form your questions. Sometimes it takes a while for those questions to sort of gel and take shape. So I'd like to thank Margie and Veronica, and we'll be seeing you all soon. Thank you.